The story in our first reading today always makes me a little nervous. I am the oldest, not of 12 brothers, but of 4. And my name isn't Reuben, but my youngest brother's name is really Joseph. And it's possible that the other 3 of us did wonder if Joseph was the favorite, if only because by the time he came around, it was okay to buy sugary cereals, even name brands. And there was all-you-can-eat frozen pizza in the freezer for him when he was in high school, but not for us. That said, it never occurred to us to throw him down a well or to try to sell him off to the family next door. But I think if we were honest, we 4 brothers were not, well, always super kind to each other. We weren't always our best selves. That is the truth of being a family for us. There was a lot of saying sorry and making up before the day was over. I still think it's funny to find in a collection we call the Bible, or even God's Word. I find it funny that it would include such a terrible story about family rivalry, that includes not only almost killing a brother, but selling him into slavery and eventually telling his father that he'd been eaten by a wild beast. It's hard to listen to such a story and then hear something like, "Hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches." It might be even harder to respond, "Thanks be to God." Sometimes I put a big question mark at the end of acclamation. Thanks be to God? The thing is, these stories of the matriarchs and patriarchs, these foundational stories of our ancestors in faith, are full, absolutely full of these kinds of stories. A second wife driven into the desert with her child because of the jealousy of the first. The theft of a brother's birthright with a bowl of soup and of his blessing by all kinds of deceit. 2 sisters offered as wages to their father's laborer. Sibling rivalry that comes very close to murder. And we're only halfway through these stories. Why don't we just edit these stories out and only keep the good parts? I mean, the Bible would be a much smaller collection of very short books, but it would definitely be an easier read. I am pretty sure that the whole book of Revelation could fit on the back of a note card. Actually, there have been folks in our history who have tried just that. There was this 2nd century Christian named Marcion who proposed a Bible with only 1 gospel, which is a version of Luke, and 10 of Paul's letters. He wanted nothing at all to do with the Hebrew Bible or the stories we read there. And Thomas Jefferson, the president, he created his own edited version of the Bible, the Jefferson Bible, which he cut and pasted to take out anything supernatural or anything not to his liking. You can still buy a copy of it if you want. And the truth be told, we do something similar in our assembly. We read from what we call a lectionary, which is a heavily edited list of readings that leaves a lot, and I do mean a lot, of the Bible out of our Sunday prayer altogether. But it still leaves stories like the ones we've been reading. If it didn't, we might not have very many passages to choose from. So why include these stories? Could it be because if we excluded them, we wouldn't be telling the whole truth about our ancestors? Or even the whole truth about ourselves? How many of us wouldn't prefer our own lectionary of our lives, where we tell only the good parts and omit the times when, well, to put it mildly, we were not always our best selves? Alas, no. Our common book of stories in the Bible won't permit it. It's the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, warts and all. So help us, God. Because after all, isn't that the way God can help us? When we tell the whole truth about ourselves, our jealousies along with our trusting loves, our resentment along with our gratitude, our greediness along with our generosity. I know for myself that it is only in such honesty before God that I feel something like freedom. Or to quote Jesus in the Gospel of John, the truth, the whole truth, will make you free. Does that sound familiar to anyone else? I know it must, because I have heard so much testimony in this church and others about how acknowledging things like addictions or unhealthy relationships or racist attitudes has so often been the first step to healing them. Maybe that's why we often include a confession, an absolution in our prayer. Because the first moment of experiencing God's forgiving grace is acknowledging that we need it. As I sit with these difficult stories of the Bible, I cannot help but think about the debate our own society is having right now over how we tell our common national story, about which parts we emphasize and which parts we deny, from state flags to statues to names on buildings. I wonder if we allowed ourselves to take a page from the Bible and have the courage to tell the whole truth about the dispossession and genocide of Native peoples, about slavery perpetuated against persons of African heritage and their descendants, and its legacy now, of systemic injustice based on race or class, all at work. These hard stories, these truthful stories, are not easy to tell, as we have been discovering in these past weeks in our time of adult formation, talking about racism. And yet, what healing might we be missing out on by not telling them and telling them fully? Having lived in Australia, I was always moved by the acknowledgement of country, which began every public event, which always named the Aboriginal people and the land in that place. And sometimes even better, it was called the welcome to country, which can only be given by an Aboriginal person of that land. That is not to say Australia has discovered actual justice yet in the matter of First Peoples and the later invaders and colonists. But there is something for me about that civic liturgy that tells more of the truth and points toward something new, new possibilities, new ways to tell a common story. Maybe that is part of what the Spirit is saying to the churches in these stories that tell our whole truth, the truth about ourselves, about our families, our community, our nation. That may be the truth that sets us free. The truth that allows God's word to appear in a news story, one that heals what has gone before and points us towards God's surprising ending. Wouldn't we love to be able to tell a story like that?